Guy, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I guess like good morning for people in the US, good afternoon, people in Brazil. Um, Thank you so much, Edu, for first of all for the invitation. As you mentioned, my name is Guilherme. I'm the head of fraud prevention and fintech data here at FREENOW. My background is in statistics, pretty much. So I actually come from a data background. I trailed my career through data to then be in the position of leading the fraud department at the moment. And explain a little bit of my role here at FreeNow, what it means, like this big title, right? Fraud prevention and fintech data. So basically, I have two departments that are currently reporting to me. One is the Central Fraud and Risk Operations, and that's where the fraud comes from, and the fintech data team as well, which is composed by data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, serving not just fraud, but serving the entire fintech ecosystem here at FreeNow. And yeah, pass the ball to you, Edu.
That's great, Guy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining and take the opportunity to share this success story. I'm pretty excited for today's session because it's basically showing what we did for over a year. I'm Eduardo. My background is software engineering and computer science. And now I'm pretty much working with food delivery and ride sharing companies in all the continents and in the world. And so it's a pretty small community and the challenges are similar. So I hope the audience enjoy what they're going to see today. So to get started, I want to share some big numbers of the partnership. So over this past 1 year, we protected over 9 million users in Europe, and they will be serving by 150,000 drivers. And the main thing that we accomplished together was a 75% reduction in fake account activity. So the idea for today, it will be pretty much tell you real world stories about what we found and how we tackled fraud together between FreeNow and Incognia. What you can expect today is to discuss fake and multi-rider accounts, device intelligence signals, driver fraud from the device ID angle and also the location, why every percentage point counts, the partnership, and a wrap up. All right. And at the end, we're going to show you, we're going to hear your questions and we're going to be glad to answer all of that. All right. Okay. So, Guy, can you introduce Free Now before I start with the questions?
Yeah, sure. For most of the people in Europe, they are familiar with FreeNow, I would say. But for those outside, FreeNow is a mobility app with a taxi focus here in Europe. We are available in a lot of cities, like 150 European cities across 9 markets. And why we call ourselves like the super app here, right? Because within our app, like it's a taxi first approach, but you can actually request for car sharing, request for public transportation tickets, scooters, e-bikes. So we try to focus a lot like on the entire ecosystem of mobility here. Our headquarters in Germany, in Hamburg, where I'm based. And I guess a lot of you heard in the news recently, it's been 2 weeks since we announced that we were acquired by Lyft in the US. So very happy with these deals. Like a lot of exciting here happened at Free Now and looking forward for the future ahead.
That's great, Guy. So here at Incognia, we basically combine three main layers. The first one is a really strong device ID. The second one is an apartment level location data. And last but not least, tamper detection to make sure we can trust the data we collect. We are right now in over 500 million devices across more than 180 countries around the world. I'm also glad to share that Incognia is currently the global leader solution for fraud and risk for the gig economy. Over 60% of the global top food delivery and ride-sharing companies are already using Incognia. And last year alone, we returned over 4.2 billion risk assessments just to this industry. All right, so let's start from the very beginning, Guy, because before the partnership with Incognia, I'm pretty sure you had a lot of internal tools. When and how did you decide that was time to benchmark what you have and test a vendor? And additionally, if you could share with the audience how it was to get proof of value prioritized
Yeah.
in a scenario that all backlogs and engineering resources are overwhelmed.
Yeah, thanks, Edu. So I guess it's important for to us to understand where we stood, right? So when I was discussing this webinar with Edu, I felt like it was really important to give you the context of where we were at FREENOW, right? Like what's the situation over here. So I was recently promoted to the position of the fraud manager in the company, and we had the goal of building a flexible fraud prevention orchestrator, right? So what do I mean by flexible? That we want to integrate this fraud prevention orchestrator in different workflows, either on the registration, either at the request level, even like at the refunds when you see we have cases of refund abuse. But also more important than that, we needed to balance the customer experience and the risk, right? So I will give you a snapshot of what is this orchestrator here in a second. So what was the things that we were taking into consideration, right? So at FreeNow, we're having like several different attacks, and people from ride hailing, you know that is a low margin business, right? So we really need to prevent these attacks, but also we understand the importance of the user acquisition here. And we were seeing good results like from our orchestrator from the perspective of behavioral data, but we started to see some weird behaviors like in Ireland, for example, one funny case, right? Like in Ireland, we had more users than the population at some point. So of course, like we had duplications over there, but it was something that we were not able to see at that different moment. So internally, like we were discussing that based on also on our experience, that device was an important thing for the team, and device was a key aspect of the strategy to integrate with our internal orchestrator here to make the launch right of our internal orchestrator a success as well. And as you do mention, we wanted to test fast. So when I had the first conversations with Incognia, I was like, guys, I really need to see the numbers as fast as possible. So they came up with this idea of the SDK first approach, which basically, and also thanks to our like engineering team, we did the integration with the SDK, I guess, in around 2 weeks, right, to do. And in 2 weeks, we were ready to start the POV, which we were happy to be sharing a bit of the numbers here. So this was a bit of the context, right? And like that's why we wanted to test the SDK and the device, sorry. So going here to the next slide, this is like a snapshot of what is the internal orchestrator. And then throughout the presentation, we'll show how we started to integrate the device signals into this one. So basically, we have this, what we call the fraud orchestration service internally here. And it's composed by two components mainly. One is the machine learning model that we have, and the other is the rule engine. I like to say that in a way, we're dealing with the probabilistic approach where we have the machine learning model running and the deterministic approach, which is the rule engine. And the rule engine is like a safeguard, especially when you have like attack spike that we can react quite fast to that. And basically, in a nutshell, right, like what we do as an outcome of the rules and the machine learning model, we aggregated this into three risk categories: the low, medium, and high risk, and we take decisions depending on the classification here. So why the device in this case, right? Like, and what was the importance of that? So what we took into consideration here is that we didn't want to create a lot of frictions with our customers at the registration flow, asking to validate the email, asking to validate the phone number, like having 2FA every time. And more important than that, what we're seeing is that the email and the phone number was shown to be relatively weak, right? So it's very easy like to send SMS online to validate your phone number and email you can create like this. So the device was an important aspect of the strategy for two things. One, we were looking for a partner that had like a strong identification, so the fraudsters would have a hard time to dodge this. But more than that, something subtle, like the customer will not feel that he or she is being challenged by the system. And everything that happens on fraud, like I like to say that we're the silent heroes, right? Like when everything goes well, you don't even know there's a fraud prevention mechanism running behind the scenes. And that's why, like that was the importance of the device here. So with this introduction, I will hand over back to you, Edu, to talk quickly about the fake and multiple accounts. So then I share a bit of the numbers from the poll with you guys.
Amazing, amazing. This is great context, Guy. And well, given we convinced the engineering team, and within a matter of 2 weeks, we were able to structure the POV and start seeing the numbers. I want to share the devices and account distribution, because if you think from a ride sharing perspective, and you just can get your phone right now and check your the mobility app that you use, I'm pretty sure all the audience have only one account. For example, here in California, I use my account in two providers, and basically that's only one account for me, and that's it. And that's the vast majority of the users, right? And it was the case in FreeNow too. So 99.8% of the devices only accessed one account during the POV. 0.17% of the devices accessed two accounts. So here you can think about two people living together. Okay, maybe they're sharing one phone, but then 0.028% of the devices accessed three or more accounts. And then having a strong device ID, you can have this visibility and you can start tracking the top offenders. And so in the past few days of the POV, we could see behaviors like this. We saw a single device accessing 59 accounts, 59 FreeNow user accounts. So at this point, it was pretty clear that this device alone would be a top offender. So my question for you, Guy, could you share which use cases and which kind of bad activity this kind of device accessing multiple accounts were doing in FreeNow?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing we think, right, like, it's like that's a weird behavior, right? No one will regularly actually access like 59 accounts, and why would that be the case? So in this case here, like what we were able to study through the POV, like have this like four characteristics here. So of course, like there was a lot of sharing of the promo code in some situations, but also like the abuse of this, what we call the opportunist fraudsters, right? That they were seeing that there was an open door, and they were basically creating tons of accounts, and you could see like through Reddit forums or Telegram forums, like, hey, like how to create multiple accounts at FreeNow and then redeem the voucher. And even it's like some situations where people were selling these vouchers in some situations, right? So in a way, like with this four pillar characteristic here, what we were able to see is that in reality, this top one device that we're seeing here redeemed 526 euros of voucher, I guess, within 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, which is quite a lot, right? Like our vouchers, they tend to be like discount vouchers, like 5-10%. So how many rides we're talking about here? Like we're talking about 50-60 rides that this person was benefit or I mean was committing fraud or committing a certain abuse here. And here, like to show like the top 5 cases here. So like this data between January and February afterwards. These were like the top 5 devices, just the top 5, accessing multiple accounts, having multiple installations, but more than that, them together were responsible for roughly 2,500 euros of voucher redemption across many rides. And this was like something that was, let's say, hidden in the shadow, right? We knew it was happening from the characteristics that I mentioned before. We had some sort of ways to counter, but not like the device put like a different layer here of defense when people, they were actually being a bit more sophisticated by changing the phone number, changing the email, changing some hash on their side. So that's what we were able to see. And that was it. Like the promo abuse, I want to extend that much. I think this is a very familiar case for everyone in the industry, but not just in the industry, like in food delivery, in everything that has voucher associated. And I wanted to bring here also to the other something that is for ride-hailing companies, it's something that it's more usual, I would say, especially from the taxi industry, which is like unpaid rides. And unpaid rides are sort of like a credit risk category. Imagine that in a way, what we are offered, like the customer only pays for the ride at the end of the ride, right? So of course we have ways to check for the funds of this customer upfront, but this creates an additional friction, and that's, we don't want necessarily to do that, right? But here was an example that through the data in the POV, right, and we continue to use the SDK afterwards, we are able to see. So this was something happened in the north of London, which was clearly like a fraud ring that was abusing that. And they were doing like this behavior that we call internally as adapt evasion. So in our platform, when you don't pay for the ride, your account is automatically blocked, right? You need to create another account. We force that. And the fraudsters didn't use. So what basically they were doing, they were having like multiple accounts. It's a similar behavior in the promo abuse, but with a more damage here. Like they were more sophisticated from what we could see from the behavioral data. So, um, in a nutshell, this attack that happened in London, sorry, throughout like 1 week, we've seen this like this fraud ring creating multiple accounts and not constantly not paying for these rights. Ultimately, what we're able to see in a period of 1 week was a loss associated with just one device, right? I'm not bringing the entire case here, but it was 1.5 thousand euros in a single week, just this device. And we started to see other characteristics on the device signals and in our behavior analysis that these fraudsters, they were not just creating multi-account, but they were using other characteristics such as app cloners, such as even jailbreakers, right? Like emulators as well. So it's shown that when the stakes are high, let's say the fraudsters are making like more profit out of this business, right, on their side, they started to become more, they start to be more sophisticated, basically. So that's what we could see in this case. So what we did on our side was not just using the device signals because we have a credit risk model on the decision here, but was also to integrate the signals into our machine learning. So if you remember, like what I showed quickly in the orchestrator, right? Like it has this two components of the machine learning and the rule engine. And here, what we did was to then integrate the signals and improve the accuracy of our model. Okay, so that's in a snapshot of how like we handle the problem afterwards. So here, what I'm showing you for if there is any data science in the call, you'll be more familiar with the last column here. But basically, of course, I cannot open the feature right in our model, but you can see here that this is like a feature on our side that use the behavior that we have, like our own variables combined with some device signals. Okay, so with that, we managed to create 4 risk categories that you can see on the first column here. And you can see that higher, like the category, right? So it's a very classic thing on fraud models, higher the risk. So what we managed to do is to concentrate 55% of risk in the last category here. I added like another column for curiosity for those that are more from the data that are joining here, which is the WE, which is basically showing like if we're how we are impacting the score, like in a nutshell, like in a very simple way of explaining. But here is just to make it a little bit more tangible for all of you when I say, hey, we integrated with the machine learning model, but what was the result for that, right? So this is just a snapshot of one feature that we have in the model, like getting better by integrating like the know-how that we have at FREENOW about fraud prevention with the signals that we have on the device side. And that's it. Like, so to quickly wrap up, right? Like these 2 cases that we've shown you so far. So by tracking the device when the voucher abuse, we're able to identify these top offenders. And more we started to ban and block these accounts, more it was leading to the fake accounts, like to multi-account, right? And basically, this is like an overall message, and not just like for FREENOW, but for everyone in the business, that sometimes when you're saving money for a voucher, it means that like how much money you're spending with fraudster, and then how much money you can then invest in the good customer, even like in a different campaign, right? And that was a bit of the focus that we wanted to put here. When it comes to the depth, right, of the conclusions here, that's what I said, like the fraudsters, they were more professionals. We could clearly more see like while the signals of like the device for voucher, they were everywhere, we could see more concentrations in some areas on the depth case that I mentioned, as I said, like on the north of London in this case. So the solution here needs to be one step further than looking to multi-account, but actually combining the signals and adjusting like our machine learning model. And of course, I cannot open the results here for you, but we're able to like then start reducing the friction as well, but also starting to reduce our risk KPIs at the same time, which we are quite proud of. And that was it. The first 2 cases here at FREENOW related to ride sharing. And I hand over back to you, Edu, to talk about the fake accounts here.
This is great, Guy. Extremely useful. I hope the audience is enjoying the real world stories. And I have to say, 75% in reduction in fake accounts events is a massive reduction. And as you said, the device shouldn't be alone, right? The first thing, of course, is have a very sticky device ID, a stack device ID that is persistent over time and across multiple installations. The device ID has to be the same even if you uninstall and install the app. This is like basic. But also, we could see that the bigger is the earning for the fraudsters. They're not only using uninstallations of the app, right? They're also using app cloners, emulators, they're factoring reset. So it's not a single thing that has to be done. You have also to understand when a tool like this is in place. And so, just to get deeper in the device signals, you mentioned something called app cloner. And I think it's worth to discuss deeper this topic because it's something that we are seeing all over the world. Um, so, just for the benefit of the audience, what an app cloner is, you can go to Google Play right now, for example, you're going to find this app called Parallel Space. And basically, it's an app that can helps you manage multiple accounts. It started with legitimate use cases. So in my case, I'm a foreign living abroad. So I have two different numbers. So I could have, for example, my Brazilian number in one instance of WhatsApp and also my US number in another instance of WhatsApp. But the problem with this is that the fraudsters realize that they can use that to tackle and to attack digital business like not only FreeNow, but other ride sharings and food delivery, banks and retailers all around the world, right? We have other instance called App Cloner that is not available on Google Play, but it's pretty easy to find. You don't even have to go to the dark web to go there. And let me explain what this software is capable of doing. So it's basically a reverse engineering of a mobile application. So you have the original app, let's say FreeNow, and then you do the reverse engineering. And this interface that I'm showing you right now is where the fraudsters can pick up which data they're gonna change. So basically, you have like Android ID here. You see the toggle change Android ID that multiple companies are using as a device ID. You shouldn't do that if you're doing because it's pretty easy to bypass not only uninstalling and installing the app, but also with an app cloner, it's just a matter of clicking the toggle. And so you can change Android ID and multiple identifiers. You can disable cameras to inject image. You can mute microphone. So you can do pretty much tamper with any kind of data that your app is going to collect. And at the end, when you finish selecting which data you want to change, then this software will recompilate the app and create a new instance. And so in this example, we have 10 clones of Telegram, and which of these clone is generating different information. They are pretending to be something that they are not. And so depending on how much money a fraudster spend in a tool like app cloner, they will have access to different features, which is kind of wild. It's like the what we call fraud as a service. They are paying for the service on a subscription model to commit fraud in large scale. And so one thing that is interesting, and we have been seeing in several markets, is this feature called fake camera, because a lot of ride-sharing companies and food delivery, they are doing facial recognitions either with the driver or the courier. And so, of course, you want to recognize someone, you cannot allow them to upload a photo from the camera roll. You need the person to put the face live in real time to see if the face matches, right? But the app cloner is allowing fraudsters to bypass this kind of stuff. Not only facial recognition, but uploading documents. And so here's the proof that we got from another app, but it's basically three different driver accounts with the exactly same picture. And so think with me, if if this facial recognition is supposed to be in real time, how can different driver accounts have the same exactly facial recognition? So this is a classic of example of the impact of an app cloner on a driver app that we have with another customer. Just speaking about the partnership with FreeNow, we blocked together over 500,000 actions using app cloners and emulators. So it's a pretty big number. And I'm particularly concerned about this, because what we have seen, the trend in the market is a hyper growth of this kind of tools being used. So just a comparison in the industry that we are serving, gig economy and food delivery, ride sharing, we see from 2023 to 2024, the usage of this kind of tool went up by 447%, including app cloner usage, which is massive. And all right, if you are not using facial recognition on the driver side, you still have to be concerned about app cloners, because we were testing with other customers the chargeback rate when it comes to an app cloner in place against not the app cloner. And so we saw that the usage of app cloner increases the likelihood of a chargeback in almost 4 times, which is pretty big. And as Guy was saying, it's the kind of variable that can distinguish and help your models to make better decisions. All right, so it seems like it's a wrap from the user use cases, but I'm pretty sure I was looking into the audience attendees, and I'm pretty sure we have a lot of people curious about driver fraud and abuse. So, Guy, could you help us understand what were you doing before Incognia? And just out of curiosity, we started recently to understand together what we can do to reduce driver fraud and abuse.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love to give context, right? And I will give a little bit more on the context that we have here in Europe when it comes to driver fraud and the challenges that we face. So first, like what we have to understand that we operate across 9 markets, and there's like regulation on the EU in general, but there's also local regulation. Sometimes there is regulation even at the city level. So what we can and what we cannot do, like in terms of like sanctioning drivers, really changes according to each city, and also the fraud changes according to each city. So one example is like Barcelona is a much more regulated city compared to Madrid. And so you have even like in the country that you operate, you have like a lot of difference within like the cities there. The second thing that we were able to see is that depending on which market we were talking about, we were seeing different fraudulent behaviors. So there was, in a way, like there was multiple fraudulent behaviors that we were identifying on our side. And the situation that we were at FREENOW a couple of years ago, I mean, one year ago, more or less, was that this was leading to like localized custom process. So if you discuss things with the operations team in Poland, the way that they were handling, let's say, overcharge was different from the way that people in Ireland they were handling, right? So we wanted to do this exercise to centralize the process and create one classification that would then help the markets in having like a way to review the driver and not review the fraudulent behavior. So we came up with this idea here. So in a similar fashion as an orchestrator that I present to you, like on the rider side, we have not an orchestrator, but we have a classification on the driver side. The theory behind is that a fraudster is a fraudster regardless, and they will commit more than one type of fraud depending like what we, I mean, the opportunity, right? So here is just a glimpse of like some of the fraud cases we see on the driver side. So the collusion, fake rides, they with a take rate, for example, by underreporting cash rides, for example. There's a few things here. And then our classification model analyzed like tour characteristics, like the driver characteristics as well, to perform like a similar classification as I mentioned before. Like it's not exactly that, but like for the sake of the presentation, I'm using like on the low, medium, and high risk. And then depending on the market, we can work with semi-automations or not here. So this is where we stand, like at the moment at FREENOW with this classification. And what Edu and I, what we prepared for you today is that, okay, remember the same story on the rider side. What are the types of fraud that we are not be able to see now just by looking into this data? What we are missing, or maybe we can even use this data, but we don't know that this fraud is happening at the moment. When with the device technology, this will help us to identify those cases. And let's explore those cases a little bit now. So here's one classic example of driver account sharing that we're able to see. So first, in the city, like part of my German here, but of Wellington, we saw a driver accessing like a driver account, in this city, close to the north of Germany here. And then we saw like another device accessing the same driver account, but now in the city of Essen. Here. You can think that, okay, this is possible, right? Like Germany is not like a huge country, but what was funny in this case here is that the access took like between like the first access and the second one, we had like just with a 10 minutes interval here. So you may ask like, but you can find like other data points to identify that. Yes, now like I'm showing the example can be a bit obvious, but what the thing is like using like additional signals from what we see, it's easier. It's like, as I mentioned from the regulations, right? We have more evidence that this particular driver account is associated with malicious behavior or misbehavior, whatever you want to call that. So um, in order to sanction a driver here, like in a lot of cities in Europe, we need to build a lot of evidence. And remember that we are in a marketplace with a lot of competition as well. So we can't simply start in like blocking drivers, right? We really need to prove that. So combining the device, combining like A, B, C, D information, we can start like to really get to a point where we say, hey, this fraudster is this driver is really a red flag. And this was the first one of the first case. And um, now going to the collusion and fake rights, this is something very new that we found in the Frankfurt airport. So I will leave the ground to you, Edu, as we talk about this recently, to walk the audience through this case here. You're on mute, Edu.
Oops, thank you. Yeah, so just sharing a bit more about this collusion example. This iPhone would be suspicious alone by accessing 14 driver accounts. So there's no way this kind of behavior would be a good behavior. But to become even more suspicious, this device was always using a fake GPS to generate locations in the Frankfurt airport. And also, when we look deeper into this device, we saw that it was not using driver accounts, but also user accounts. So we started thinking what they are doing to get what this same person is doing with all those accounts. And at the end, we our biggest suspicion at the moment is that it's a quest abuse, right? The driver is just earning more money by creating fake rights. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is that here we have several different layers of information to be evaluated. The first one is the device ID. The device ID has to be, if the device is the same and is accessing accounts on both sides, your device ID has to be good enough to see that this is the same device. Because like most of the device IDs out there, even the internal one or other providers, they will generate different device IDs for different applications. So you have to make sure the device ID is not persistent across different installations, but also across different applications. In this case, driver application and also user application. We also have another risk indicator, which is the fake GPS, that they were basically going to a specific place that the fraudster is thinking it's more advantage for him. And yeah, so by understanding a sample of the rides together, we found out that 0.1% of fake rides where the user and the driver were the same person. And well, since I spoke about fake GPS, Guy, why don't you give some stats for us?
Yeah, just like one comment here, like especially for people in the ride-hailing industry, not necessarily like having the accounts on the passenger and the driver on the same device are associated with the collusion, right? With the abuse. But what we see a lot, like on airports, for example, that the drivers they want to skip the virtual ranks, they will use this to create like cancellations and start to skip the virtual rank, basically. So the possibilities are multiple, as I said, like they can always come up like with a new way, but it's important that we find the problem like on the root, like we found the root cause of the problem. So we prevent different fraud types by like one mean, let's put it like that. And talking about the fake GPS, this is something that we're starting to discover as well. So I have just one big number to share here, but it goes a bit in line of what we were saying. But what we've seen so far is that the average price of a ride associated with fake GPS is 2.2 times higher than the usual. I can't really share like the average ride value, but what I can say is that it's a quite expensive ride here if you're talking about 2.2. So this is another indication, and not necessarily like it's associated with overcharge, right? That could be like the first thing that you have in mind, but it could be that like the driver is using the GPS spoofing to be in surge areas, like where the dynamic price is active, when it shouldn't be the case, right? Because surge exists to balance the marketplace, and if the driver is cheating on that, we're not really balancing the marketplace. And second is to take airport rides. This can also increase a bad experience on the customer side, where the ETAs are longer. So the cases of driver here, they're much less associated with a direct loss, like the cases are shared on the passenger side, right? Like abusing debts, abusing voucher, abusing chargeback, but they're more operational fraud. It's a lot about the experience that we give to the customer. Imagine you get to the airport and you have to wait like 15 minutes for your taxi. You really don't want that, right? And especially in a scenario where you can do a hop on, and we need to be quite competitive against like the hop on rides, for example. So that's what we're able to see so far on the driver. So we show you like three examples and how the signals are contributing. But I would like to reiterate here is that these signals help build evidence. And that's one of the main things that we're focusing, like building evidence. So we make sure that the false positive on the driver side, being like impacting one driver has a lot of impact, it's minimal. So that's one of the main masses here that I would like to share when it comes to the driver use and fraud. Edu, do you want to introduce this one? Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead and share this story because it was a recent learn, and I
Yeah,
think it's also something that the audience has to be aware of.
yeah. So, I mean, we're getting to the end of the slides, and recently we came across like this situation here at FreeNow, and I thought this is not necessarily related to one fraud case, but is related to one of the struggles that we as fraud leaders around the world we probably face when we talk about we're scaling the product for fraud, and we are not scaling necessarily 100%. So what are the breaches that what are the doors that we're leaving open, right? So what is the importance of that? So let me show you like a graph here. So we started the operation with Incognia around July, right? And we start, and like the graph we're seeing is like the coverage of new accounts. So basically, what we wanted to see is that for every new registered account, we have one device ID associated to this account, and that's what the coverage KPI here is measuring. So we started to scale the product because we had concerns, right, about the device and so on. Like it's normal at the beginning of the operation, we didn't want to like flip totally until like that November. We were seeing like a nearly like 90, 100% to finally have we reached the target of having the coverage of 100% then in December, right? And that was our goal. But beginning of this year, so very fresh actually, we saw that this number was quite stable at 99%. So it was for like 1-2 weeks that we reached in December the 100%, and then went back to 99. And then we started to ask like, what is happening? Like why we're not able to reach the 100%. So it's a KPI that don't necessarily you would have in mind, right? When we're looking to the device here. And this is what was happening. Um, I firmly believe that like the device combined with our orchestrator strategy was working, and then the fraudsters they realized that, and and they started to download different versions of the app. So we started to see installations from app versions that were prior to the SDK. So what you see here that there's a version available in parallel stores, dark stores, that you can download the FreeNow app in a very old version. This case is like a 2021 version here. So you may ask, Gui, what is the risk? Like the first question I had like to the team was like, what was the risk associated to this? We have to stop that. And here's like a very simple table that I want to present you all. We have like on the first column, if there's the Incognia SDK associated to that. So, and then we're looking to the new accounts only. So the accounts that were new and we didn't have the SDK, or in other words, we're using older versions of the app, represented like a loss of 31%, and it was quite a lot. And I can't also share like how much they represent on the total cost on our side, but was also considerable. So the message here, like, and why we put the title of the scaling without gas, because this is the cost of 1%, right? We could look into that and say, but it's just 1% of new accounts. What is the percentage of accounts that we're talking about at the end? But fraud is the exception. And that's something that, like, throughout my career as a fraud lead, um, I've seen that. Like, every time that we see like a small percentage, something that is a bit weird, but it doesn't represent that much in total. When you put this against the loss that is creating, it definitely can create like a considerable loss. And that's what we're able to see here in this case. So this is just like to highlight the number, right? But we had pretty much 24 times more losses in versions without the device ID protection. That showed to me that, okay, like the fraudsters are moving to the next stage, right? They're becoming more sophisticated because they will not stop. And we have to constantly keep an eye on them. That's what keeps my job, right? Um, but I will hand over to Edu to talk a little bit about how the fraud is evolving here.
Yeah, this is really interesting, Guy. And I think this number shows clearly that the strategy was working and it forced the fraudsters to try some way around, right? Just showing up two interesting questions that I just saw. The first one from Jonathan. Thanks, Jonathan, for the question. Parallel stores have old versions of app available for download. Yes. So both iOS and Android have parallel stores. On iOS, it requires jailbreak, is a store called Cydia. And also on Android, there are multiple, since you can download a file and install the app directly without passing through the Google Play. So what those stores are doing, and we can share the names afterwards, but they're basically keeping a history of files of older versions, and they're making it available for download for anyone. You can just go ahead and search for parallel stores. You're going to find a lot of them. And you can basically get the file of different historical versions. What the fraudsters were doing, going to those stores, finding older versions in which the Incognia SDK was not there, and then they started creating new accounts again without being blocked by our device and tampering detection. So I think the message here, beyond what Guy said, is that you have to systematically update the defense and make sure you're not leaving any benefit behind for older versions, or you have to discontinue depending on how much money you can lose. Guy, I think there is a question for you from Prashan. What do you mean by 100% device coverage? Is Incognia collecting device signals separately from FreeNow, and 100% of FreeNow users are coming from devices for which Incognia already have signals?
No, it's more simple than that. So imagine that like you have 100 passengers and I need to see 100 devices at least, so, and per passenger. So one passenger ID needs to be associated to one device. When the passenger ID, it's, let's say, imagine like in a secret, right? The passenger ID column and then a device ID. If the device ID is null, it's counting as 0 for the coverage KPI. So that's what we're trying to measure. In a way, if the coverage is not 100%, it means that there are some people in our platform, some passenger IDs in our platform, that they don't have the device ID associated with that. Hope that answers your question. And I guess I can jump in the next one here, right? So is it possible to force the update to still use the app like this? Yeah, so that's exactly like one of the things that we're currently working. And you may ask, like, but why haven't you done that before? And it's pretty much around friction, right? Like when we see like just the first number of people using the older versions of the app was still a considerable number of customers, and not necessarily all of them were bad. So we narrowed the population into, okay, what is the population that is using this as an open door? And then for this particular group now, they will only be allowed to use the newer versions of the app. And by newer in this case are the ones where the SDK is already integrated in the app.
Yeah. One thing that I also saw from other partners doing, Guy, is like you can still allow older versions to work, but then you start restraining specific kind of action. Okay, you want to create an account? Okay, we are not going to give you a voucher if the app version is that old. But it's always a balance between friction and business, right? Because depending on the market, it's not exactly the main case here in the United States, but in emerging markets, you have a lot of people with older versions and older phones. So always you have to keep in mind this friction. Yeah, so just to share and summarize how we see the evolving fraud in the gig economy. So, number one, we see weak device IDs out there. Device IDs that are bypassed by simply uninstalling and installing the app. So then the gig economy apps have to implement a strong device identifier like Incognia. And then once you have a strong device ID in place, what the fraudsters are going to do, they are going to use app cloners or emulators to try to bypass the device ID. As I showed you before, within a few toggles or a few clicks, they are able to create another instance, changing the information to bypass device IDs. So at the second point, it's really important for you to be able to detect this kind of tool. So whenever an app clone is in place, whenever an emulator is in place, you are either detecting this or you're either receiving, suffering with fraud coming from this kind of tools. And last but not least, one thing that we started discussing on the driver side is the location part of it. Because if the device ID strategy is working, if detecting the app cloners and emulators is also working, the next step for the fraudsters is factory reset the device or change to another device. And so the only way to catch this kind of behavior is with precise location behavior. And so just for you to have an idea how important location data is, we did a recent study with one of our customers, and we saw the location layer alone was able to catch 51% more fraud in comparison to the two other layers. So location data is also extremely important, but not any kind of location data, precise location data to an apartment level. And yeah, so we are going to the end of this slide, Guy, and I have kind of a last question for you because fraud is scaling pretty much everywhere. Here in the US, scaling, Brazil, scaling, Mexico, scaling, India, Egypt, everywhere. And right now, you are ahead of fraud prevention, reporting a great story about fraud reduction. 75% reduction in fake account activity is great. So my question for you is like, could you give us a testimonial of why you think this partnership between FREENOW and Incognia has been so successful?
That's a good question. And I think like there are several points to take into consideration here. For me, one is that through the partnership, like one of the things like that we cannot relax. I will say the next slide, but the fraudsters they will not stop doing, right? Like it's their income, same as my income is work as fraud with fraud prevention. So I guess what the partnership allow us is to um, be ahead of the fraudsters and work with fraud prevention in a way that is more prevention and not reactive to fraud, right? We're not reacting to the signals we're receiving, but we are finding ways um, to block the fraud. So like if they try to escape one flow, they will end up in a different like fraud prevention flow and vice versa. So um, the partnership, one of the first things is that. Second thing for me is that something that I appreciate in our partnership that we work together as a team. So Incognia is nearly like the teams that are working with us. They're nearly an extension of my data team and my fraud managers as well. Really taking care of like everything that is happening, like every weird signal that we started to receive. So one common behavior we see at FreeNow is that a fraud spike doesn't happen out of nowhere. They were testing before. And now we want to reach to the point that we're not let the spike happen to then react, but see like the different behaviors that are starting to happen to prevent them from creating like a huge damage. And the third, for me, is that the know-how that like Incognia has with fraud prevention, with like benchmarking with a lot of customers, it's helping us to understand like the big picture here and then move ahead again in the same idea of like being ahead of the fraudsters and not reacting to the fraudsters here.
Whoa, this is amazing. I'm proud to hear this, Augie. Thank you very much. We also really appreciate the partnership, not only with you but your entire team. All right, we are almost. It's almost time to the Q&A. And Guy, could you wrap up your last comments about everything we said before?
Yeah. We have been talking a lot about fraud as a service in the different speeches we're giving like in Barcelona and London. But I really like to reiterate here that this is not like the buzzword, right? Like we're really facing like organized crimes, and you may see like through the KPIs as that, but we really have strong hypothesis, for example, that the reason why the fraudsters are trying to hide their signals is not just to abuse the platform, but to commit even like a high level criminal activity here. So it's really their job to do that, and they're making money doing that, and we really have to fight against it. When it comes to defensive layers, right? One layer is not enough. Second layer is not enough. Maybe even the third. So you constantly have to update your layers. So here, what we try to bring to you to say that a flexible orchestrator that can integrate with the different workflows in your company, combine like with signals that are hard for the fraudsters to dodge, like the strong device. And then if they move to the next stage of the jailbreak, we can also capture that and then adding intelligence of location if required as well. The third on the know your customer, it's not just like often we in fraud we talk about finding the fraudsters, but how can we also create like the VIP customers based on these signals as well? There is very unlikely that the fraud behavior is coming from them. So knowing how to separate these groups to don't create friction with the good customers in our platform is also quite important. Which also leads me to the last point here, which is shut the right doors at the right time. And I can connect this to the question, right? Like, can we force the update of the app? When is the right time to do that, right? Like, what is the context of the business that allow you to be more risk averse or less risk averse, depending. So, finding the right time and adequating the strategy of your fraud teams to the company reality is something like definitely super important here. And these were my closing words. Hoping to see a lot of questions here. I'm happy to answer all of them. And thanks so much.
Yeah, Guy, thank you very much. And once again, I think we had great questions today about device coverage, also how to force update, when to do that. So we are glad to hear any further questions that you might have before we close this webinar. So we have a question from Mark. When using Parallel Space or other fraud as a service app, are there any indicators that show up in the metadata to identify the app was used, even if the photo input itself may appear legitimate? Yes, Mark. So one thing that we are doing at Incognia is like everything we said here in about different device signals like emulator, app cloner, download from non-official stores. Every single piece of information is being returned to the customers as a different variable. So it's basically, is there any evidence of app cloner? Yes or no. Any evidence of download from the outside stores? Yes or no. Any evidence of an emulator in place? Yes or no. So it's not like a black box. We are basically delivering over 50 variables, so the customers can ingest and use that into the models or making decisions specifically according to each of those variables.
Mhm. And if I can add, apart then from the device signals, right? Like we've seen situations. It really depends on the case, but one case that I can quickly share is that we're seeing that these fraudsters they were sending their requests through a AWS IP. So in general, like when we see like a regular customer, the IP of a regular customer, it will not be associated to an S3 IP, for example. So we can see some stuff, but we cannot prove, right? That's why I say like building like different layers of proof to allow you to justify a certain block. And then of course, like there are some business metrics that you can add afterwards to see the retention, like when we talk about, for example, the voucher abuse, right? For sure, that account has a very low retention. Like we don't see this account as the very low CLV as well, which combines with the signals that we're seeing to justify then not sending vouchers to these customers.
Good. We have another question here from Prashant. In the fake camera example, three different accounts having the same photo. Does Incognia does real-time image match to detect it, or the process is done async? So the answer for that, Prashant, is we do not go into the image evaluation. We are not collecting any image. We are trying to understand the root cause of the problem. In this case, is an app tampering. So it's basically the app data is being tampered with, and that's what we try to understand. So what we see is basically when an app cloner, which is the tool that allow fraudsters to inject image, is in use, the fraud rate is nearly 100%. There's no reason why a legitimate user of a ride-sharing company is cloning the app and changing the source code. So we are basically detecting the tool itself instead of going to the image. And this way, we are basically saying to our customers, there's an app cloner in place, you shouldn't trust this user. And that's it. We are not in the image itself. And everything is in real time, working below 200 milliseconds. Oh, a lot of questions. We have another one. Can you elaborate on strong ID? Is this closer to a sticky identifier or is this closer to a device fingerprint? Guy, I'm not sure if you want to answer that, but my perspective is a sticky identifier of the device. It's a device fingerprint that actually works across multiple installations, and even if an app cloner or this kind of stuff is in use.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it.
We have another one from Isam. Have you encountered cases of fraud where the customers or the driver cancels the ride after they are meeting? If yes, how you're addressing this?
And so there are two ways of looking into this. So first, yes, so that's the thing. I can't give you all the details, right? But you can see the problem from two sides. So first, you can look to your customer, like, and the customer in this case, like the passenger, and you see like, is this like already like a VIP, like customer that is using quite a lot of the platform? Because with that, you start to exclude the likelihood or reduce the likelihood that this customer is involved on this scheme. So you take out the customer from the equation, and then you just look into the driver, and you see how often you have the cancellations close to the approach point, right, to the pickup location. So this is one. And second, you can think about collusion in this case, if by any chance. It's a bit more rare on the collusion side, but if then the characteristics of the account, they are new, if you have encountered characteristics like we mentioned before, of the driver and the passenger looking to be the same person or be related somehow, but in a way like we put the magnifying glass always on the driver for those cases. Does answer the question as well.
Yeah, just one additional thing is like Isam, you can have a look at the cancellation rates on both sides and how they combine. We heard that a lot in Asian markets about collusion and driver and user colluding after the meeting point. And but actually, what we saw is that most of the losses are related to the same person doing fake rights. Um, and we saw that after doing what we call proof of value that Guy just described. All right, so I think we have no more questions. Guy, thank you so much for the session. It was great. I have been learning a lot with you across this entire year. The partnership is great. And I hope the audience have enjoyed what we just shared. And feel free to reach out to both of us through LinkedIn or email. We are going to be super happy to engage further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edu. Thank you, everyone. See you. Bye bye.